The rain had a peculiar way of falling over Ravenswood Manor, soft, deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if echoing the temperament of the man who ruled it. Duke Alistair Ravenswood stood before the tall windows of his study, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid as a soldier awaiting an unpleasant verdict. The faint glow of the fireplace behind him cast a silhouette that made him appear taller, broader, and far more formidable than he truly felt inside. From the courtyard below, carriages were already arriving, sleek black lacquer, gold insignias, horses snorting in the cold evening air. Tonight's gathering, though modest by London's standards, was of great importance to him, or at least it ought to have been. It was the first official presentation of his new bride, Lady Seraphina Lyndhurst, to society as the Duchess of Ravenswood, a title she had worn for only a single night, a night that had ended in disgrace. He pressed his lips into a thin line, recalling the sharp echo of footsteps in the corridor outside his chamber on that fateful evening, the hushed whispers that had slithered their way into his mind. A bride caught wandering the estate grounds at an improper hour. A rumor, unfounded or not, was enough to fracture the brittle pride he carried like armor. He had acted swiftly, coldly, disastrously. Banished, he muttered under his breath, the word tasting bitter like a confession. Seraphina had left Ravenswood Manor before dawn the next morning. Her bridal gown, still creased from the wedding celebrations, her veil crumpled between her trembling fingers. He had not spoken to her. He had not allowed her to speak to him. His pride had spoken for them both. And now, months later, she was returning. Not by his invitation, but by that of his sister, Lady Genevieve. An intervention he had neither approved nor forbidden, because it seemed easier to avoid the matter altogether than confront the consequences of what he had done. A soft knock broke the quiet. Tension of the room. "Enter," he said, voice crisp. The door opened with a gentle creak and Genevieve stepped inside. Her presence always carried warmth, a stark contrast to his storm-like intensity. She approached him with measured grace, her gown rustling softly across the carpet. "Alistair," she began, pausing beside him at the window. "The guests are gathering. It would be appropriate for you to join them." "I am aware," he replied, jaw tightening. She studied him quietly. "She will be here." "Soon?" He closed his eyes for a moment. "So I have been told. She deserves to be welcomed," Genevieve murmured. "She is, after all, still your wife." A subtle ache formed beneath his ribs. "In name only." Genevieve lifted her chin. "You made certain of that." Alistair turned away from the window, unable to meet the truth in her gaze. "I acted according to propriety." "You acted according to your wounds," she corrected gently. The words struck deeper than he expected. She had always seen more than she was supposed to. He exhaled slowly. "What would you have me do?" "Face her," Genevieve said, her voice soft but firm. "Face what you did. Or rather, what you believe you had reason to do." He opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of carriage wheels rolling over gravel outside silenced him. His heartbeat quickened, too suddenly, too violently. Genevieve moved to the window. "She has arrived." Alistair hesitated. Then, unable to stop himself, he turned to look. Outside, a deep emerald. Carriage had halted at the entrance. The footman lowered the steps. A slender figure emerged, cloaked in dark velvet that shimmered under the lantern light. Even from a distance, her posture was unmistakable, graceful, composed, dignified, as if she had grown into her title despite being denied the chance to wear it. Lady Seraphina Lyndhurst. No, his wife. A gust of wind lifted her hood delicately, revealing the dark cascade of her hair and a profile more refined than he remembered, perhaps because he had barely allowed himself to look at her on their wedding night. She paused at the base of the stairs, glancing up at the manor with an expression too restrained to read, yet it pierced him all the same. Something in his chest shifted, an old regret stirring beneath the armor he had spent years constructing. Genevieve laid a hand on his arm. "You should greet her." "I cannot," he whispered, the words escaping before he could suppress them. "Why?" she asked quietly. He swallowed hard. "Because I am not the man she deserved, and I fear her eyes will show me so." Genevieve's expression softened, but she refrained from replying. She merely offered him a final, knowing look before leaving the room. He remained fixed at the window, unable to move, unable to breathe. The ballroom of Ravenswood Manor glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off polished marble floors. The music, soft strings and a gentle pianoforte, filled the air with an elegance that felt almost cruel to him. Alistair stood near the column-lined entrance, his posture straight, his face an impassive mask crafted from years of aristocratic expectation. He sensed her presence before he saw her. A hush fell over the crowd. Heads turned, fans fluttered. Murmurs swept through the room like a rising tide. He forced himself to look. Lady Seraphina stood framed in the doorway, her gown a subtle shade of silver blue that whispered against the floor like something ethereal. The neckline, though modest, revealed the delicate curve of her collarbone. Her lips, soft and composed, held neither smile nor bitterness, and her eyes, those eyes he had refused to meet on their wedding night, were steady, clear, and devastatingly calm. His chest tightened painfully. She moved into the room with the ease of someone who had learned how to carry herself among London's elite. Her confidence was understated but undeniable, evidence that she had not merely survived her banishment, she had risen above it. And the rooms adored her. Ladies whispered admiringly. Gentlemen bowed with too much enthusiasm. Even Lord Beresford, notorious for his flirtations, approached her with a smile too warm for Alistair's liking. A muscle in Alistair's jaw flickered. Genevieve glided to Seraphina's side and whispered something, making her smile, softly, politely. A smile he had never earned. Alistair watched every movement she made with a restraint that cost him more than any battlefield would have. The crowd parted as though in reverence of her, not him. It was an unfamiliar sensation, seeing his own household respond not to his authority, but to her presence. A steward approached him quietly. "Your Grace, may I offer you wine?" He waved it away, eyes fixed on Seraphina. She caught his stare. It happened in an instant, her gaze lifting, finding his across the expanse of the ballroom. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Her expression did not change, but something flickered within her eyes, a memory perhaps, or the echo of a wound he had inflicted. He braced himself, but she looked away first. The rejection was subtle, polite, and devastating. He exhaled sharply, so quietly no one heard, but in his chest it felt like a crack. "Your Grace," a voice murmured beside him. He turned to find Lord Harrington, an old family acquaintance, observing him with mild curiosity. "She is quite remarkable, your wife." Alistair stiffened. "She is. London speaks of her often," Harrington added, sipping his wine. "Her grace, her intelligence and her kindness, quite unusual given how society treated her after—" He paused delicately. After what transpired, Alistair felt the burn of humiliation. Society speaks too freely. Perhaps, Harrington conceded, but in this case they speak with admiration. Alistair's gaze zeroed in on Seraphina once more. She was speaking now with two young ladies, her demeanor gentle, her smile faint but warm. There was no sign of resentment, no bitterness, only a quiet strength. He did not know how to approach. He felt something unfamiliar. Not jealousy, not anger, not pride. It was something far more dangerous. Regret. Harrington followed his gaze. "If I may, Your Grace, she seems different." "Different how?" Alistair asked, unable to hide the tension in his voice. "More assured, more beloved." Harrington hummed thoughtfully. "One might say she has become what you never allowed her to be." Alistair's breath caught. He turned sharply, intending to leave the conversation, but running directly into Genevieve. "Brother," she said softly, "it is time." "For what?" "To greet her." He stopped. His throat tightened. "I do not know what to say." "Then begin with anything," Genevieve said. "Even silence is better than absence." He hesitated. Then, because retreat felt more cowardly than confrontation, he stepped forward. The crowd seemed to shift as he walked, ever aware of the Duke's presence. Conversations softened, musicians slowed. Every detail of the moment felt amplified by the tension coiled inside him. Seraphina turned just as he reached her. Her breath caught, so faint he almost missed it. She curtsied with perfect grace. "Your Grace." He bowed his head stiffly. "Lady Seraphina." They stood facing one another, inches apart, yet separated by months of silence, pride, and the memory of a door closing between them on the night they should have begun their life together. Her eyes lifted slowly, meeting his, and in that instant, quiet as it was, something inside him fractured, not visibly, not dramatically, but deeply. She was no longer the timid bride he had doubted. She had become a woman London revered, and he had been the one to throw her into the cold. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded foreign to his own ears. "You look—" He paused, searching for a word that did not sound like surrender. "Well," Seraphina's lips softened with the faintest trace of irony. "As do you, Your Grace." Silence settled between them, long, heavy, aching. Then Seraphina did something unexpected, something that stole the air from his lungs. She stepped closer, not enough to break propriety, but enough that only he could hear her whisper, "I hope you find what you are looking for tonight." Her voice was steady, her eyes unflinching. He swallowed hard. "And what do you believe I'm looking for?" She hesitated, just long enough for him to feel the answer before she spoke it. "Forgiveness." His breath faltered. "But I fear," she whispered, "that forgiveness requires truth, and you have not yet sought your own." Before he could respond, before he could even breathe, she stepped back, curtsied once more, and turned away, moving elegantly toward another group of guests who welcomed her with unguarded warmth. Alistair remained frozen, his pulse unsteady, his pride unraveling thread by thread. It was the first moment, unexpected and unwelcome, when he realized Seraphina had returned not as a discarded bride, but as a woman who no longer needed him. And for the first time in his life, Duke Alistair Ravenswood felt the sting of true fear. The remainder of the evening unfolded around Duke Alistair Ravenswood like a play in which he no longer understood his role. Conversations continued. Laughter rose and fell. The orchestra played with polished grace, but every sound felt muted, distant, as if heard through glass. His attention remained fixed on Seraphina, though he pretended otherwise, leaning against a marble column with the calculated nonchalance expected of a man of his rank. Yet beneath his composed exterior, his thoughts churned with restless force. He had not anticipated her transformation. In truth, he had barely known her when they married, and perhaps that had been intentional. His mother had arranged the match before her passing, believing Seraphina Lyndhurst to be a woman of gentle temperament and unblemished reputation, ideal, she had said, for a man with Alistair's troubled disposition. Troubled. The word stung even. Now, his mother had seen what others could not or dared not acknowledge, the shadow that lingered behind his stern propriety, the remnants of wounds formed long before he inherited the title of Duke. He watched Seraphina now as she conversed with a group of ladies, her posture poised, her expressions subtle yet warm. She seemed at ease, as though the past months of social estrangement had not left scars on her spirit. That graceful composure unsettled him more than he cared to admit. She should have been hesitant, uncertain, perhaps even resentful. Instead, she moved through the ballroom with the serenity of someone who had accepted the world's judgment and chosen to rise above it. For a moment, he wondered what strength she had drawn upon to survive what he had done to her. Banishing her had been an act born of instinct more than reason, an instinct that had governed him since childhood. Distrust, withdrawal, silence. It was how he had learned to protect himself in a world where vulnerability invited nothing but pain. His father had taught him that, or rather the absence of a father had. The late Duke of Ravenswood had been a man of power, feared and respected in equal measure, but devoid of warmth. Alistair's earliest memories were of heavy boots pacing floors, sharp commands, cold reprimands, and the sense that affection was a weakness to be eradicated. When his mother died, whatever gentleness he had left faded with her, replaced by an iron resolve never to depend on anyone, and certainly never to be betrayed. The faint rustle of silk nearby drew his attention back to the present. Seraphina had shifted away from the group, accepting a glass of punch from a servant with quiet gratitude. As she turned, her gaze swept the room with measured curiosity, until, inevitably, it crossed his. It lasted only a second. But in that second, something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, not sorrow, something else, something he could not yet decipher. She lowered her gaze and moved toward the terrace doors, passing through them into the night air. Alistair hesitated. He had never been a man prone to indecision, but tonight every step felt laden with consequence. Finally, he pushed away from the column and followed at a distance, careful not to draw attention. When he reached the terrace, he paused in the shadow of the doorway. Serafina stood at the balustrade, her figure outlined by the pale moonlight. The gardens below were bathed in silver, the hedges trimmed to perfect symmetry, the fountain at the center glistening like a pool of starlight. She held her hands lightly against the stone railing, her breath forming faint clouds in the cool air. For several moments, he watched her in silence, torn between approaching her and preserving the distance he had forced upon them. But it was her posture, still composed, yet tinged with something he recognized too well, that compelled him forward. Loneliness. He stepped quietly onto the terrace, his boots making ooh. Only the faintest sound against the marble floor. She did not turn. "Do you find the evening disagreeable?" he asked, his voice low. Serafina's shoulders rose slightly with her breath before she replied. "Not disagreeable, simply overwhelming." Her tone was polite, measured, controlled. "You have always conducted yourself admirably," he said, attempting neutrality. "I do not imagine society overwhelms you easily." A subtle tension rippled through her posture. "Society," she murmured, "is easier to face than the person who cast me out of it." The words struck him, though she delivered them gently. He took a step closer, stopping a respectful distance behind her. "Lady Serafina," he said quietly, "I regret—" "Please, do not," she interrupted softly, turning her gaze to the gardens. Regret is seldom honest when spoken out of obligation. He exhaled slowly, the cold air stinging his lungs. "You believe I am obligated to regret." "I believe," she replied, choosing her words carefully, "that regret from a man who has not sought truth is merely an attempt to ease his conscience." Her calmness unnerved him more than any anger could have. He watched her profile in the moonlight, a delicate outline of unspoken strength. He wished, absurdly, that she would display a fraction of the hurt he had caused, something he could acknowledge and attempt to mend. But she remained composed. "You did not ask for my truth," he said at last. "No," she answered, turning her head just enough for him to see the faint shadow of sadness in her eyes. "Because I knew you would not give it." He felt something twist inside him. "You presume much of me." "I presume nothing," she said quietly. "I simply remember." There it was, the first fracture in her composure. Not anger, not bitterness, memory. He stepped closer, though not enough to invade her space. "You were seen wandering the estate on our wedding night," he said, his voice strained by the attempt to remain in control. "Alone. At an unusual hour. It was improper." Even as he said it, the words felt hollow. Serafina turned fully now, meeting his gaze with a steadiness that made his breath falter. "Improper," she repeated softly, almost thoughtfully. "I see. And did you ever ask me why I was wandering?" His silence answered for him. She nodded faintly, a quiet acceptance forming around her expression. "I thought so." Alistair felt the old instinct to retreat, emotionally, mentally, tighten its grip on him. He had been raised to believe that vulnerability invited exploitation. To question one's own judgment was weakness. And yet, standing before her now, he realized how that worldview had shaped the moment that destroyed their wedding night. She took a small breath, as though steadying herself. "On that night I could not sleep. Everything was new, frightening, overwhelming. I stepped outside to breathe, nothing more." Her gaze softened with a hint of pain. "When the maid told me you had asked me to leave, I thought she meant for a moment. Then she handed me a carriage cloak." His stomach twisted. He had known the decision was harsh. He had not realized it had been cruel. "I see," he murmured, though it was clear he saw nothing fully. Serafina's voice grew even quieter. "What I remember most is not the cold of the night or the shock of it. It was the way no one defended me. No one questioned your command. No one even hesitated." She looked away. "Your pride carries more weight than my name." He inhaled sharply, a faint tremor in his breath. My pride is not—" He stopped himself. The words he wanted to speak felt dishonest when confronted with her gaze. "I acted out of caution." "Caution," she repeated. "Yes, so you have said." He opened his mouth, but no words came. She studied him carefully, as though examining a puzzle she had once tried desperately to solve. "You speak of caution," she said, "but I have come to believe it was fear." His pulse stilled. Fear. The word was barely audible. Serafina nodded gently. "A man who acts with reason investigates. A man who acts with fear condemns." Her voice did not rise, but her honesty pierced him with devastating clarity. "You condemned me, without a single question." He felt exposed, as if she had peeled back a layer of armor he had worn all his life. He did not know how to respond. No one had ever spoken to him like this, not with accusation, but with understanding. And that understanding hurt more deeply than any accusation could. After a long silence, she turned back to the garden. "You do not need to explain yourself to me, Your Grace. Truly." A faint chill entered her voice. "We are strangers who share a name. Nothing more." A strange ache settled behind his ribs. "Is that how you see us?" "Yes," she said simply. "Because that is how you preferred it." He took a step closer. "And how do you prefer it?" She hesitated. He saw the conflict in her, dignity warring with an old wound. "I prefer honesty," she said. "At last. In all things." Her breath lingered in the cold air. The tension between them felt almost physical. He found himself wanting to reach out, to take her hand, to say something earnest, something real. But sincerity was a foreign language to him, one he had never learned to speak well. So he remained silent. Serafina lifted her chin slightly, regaining the composure that had momentarily slipped. "If you will excuse me, Your Grace, I should return inside." He nodded, though the motion felt heavy. As she walked past him, her gown brushing softly against the marble, he spoke without knowing he would. "Serafina." She stopped. He swallowed, voice low. "Do you intend to leave Ravenswood again?" She turned her head slowly, revealing an expression he could not decipher. "I do not intend anything without thought, Your Grace." She paused. "But I no longer belong to a place where I was not wanted." The words struck him with quiet brutality. Before he could respond, she dipped her head politely and re-entered the ballroom, leaving him alone on the terrace, the moonlight cold upon his skin. He exhaled slowly, a tremor hidden beneath the controlled motion. For the first time, he felt the faintest, most unwelcome spark of something he had resisted all evening. Interest. Not desire, though he could not deny her beauty. It was something heavier, something rooted in the knowledge that he had misjudged her profoundly. A crack had formed in the foundation of his certainty, and he knew, with a sinking weight in his chest, that it would not be the last. As he re-entered the ballroom hours later, he found Serafina laughing, softly, genuinely, at something Lord Beresford had said. And though she glanced at Alistair only once before turning away, it was enough to leave him with a torment he could not yet name. The old wound inside him, the one he had spent his life concealing, stirred, not with pain, with fear, a fear he could no longer ignore. The days following the gathering at High, Ravenswood Manor unfolded with an unsettling quiet that weighed heavily on Alistair's mind. Sleep eluded him more than usual. His thoughts, once disciplined and tightly controlled, now drifted toward Serafina with a frequency he found both surprising and unwelcome. It was not merely her transformation or the composure she displayed. It was the realization that she had built an entire version of herself outside the reach of his authority. She had grown, perhaps even flourished, in the very world he had exiled her from, and London had taken notice. This truth settled in him like a stone, making every social obligation feel heavier. Reports of her presence at various soirees, teas, and musical evenings reached him through whispers from acquaintances and subtle remarks from Genevieve. None were malicious, if anything they were admiring, but each mention tightened the tension inside him. Still, nothing disturbed him as deeply as the arrival of the season's most celebrated gentleman, Benedict Ashcombe. Elegant, charming, impeccably mannered, Benedict had returned from 3 years abroad with the reputation of a man who had acquired both wealth and wisdom through his travels. He was known for his keen intellect, his poetic way of conversing, and his effortless ability to make people feel as though they were the sole focus of the room. Alistair had met him only once before, briefly, at a parliamentary dinner. He had found him courteous, perceptive, and, most irritatingly, impossible to dislike. But that had been before Serafina. Now, as Alistair prepared to attend the Harringtons' grand winter ball, he remembered Genevieve's casual remark from earlier that day. Lord Benedict asked particularly whether Serafina would be in attendance. The words replayed in his mind with uncomfortable clarity. When Alistair arrived at the Harrington estate that evening, the ballroom was already alive with music and conversation. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the elegantly dressed guests. Snow fell gently outside the tall windows, adding a sense of quiet splendor to the occasion. He entered the room with the composed confidence expected of his rank, greeting familiar faces with restrained courtesy. Yet his gaze kept drifting, searching, anticipating. He found Serafina near the far end of the ballroom, surrounded by a small circle of admirers. Her gown tonight was a deep midnight blue, the fabric soft and flowing, adorned with delicate silver embroidery that glimmered like stars. Her hair was styled elegantly, yet not extravagantly, with only a few loose strands framing her face in a way that softened her features. She looked radiant. The realization struck him like a physical impact. Before he could gather himself, the crowd around her shifted, and Lord Benedict Ashcombe appeared at her side. He bowed to her with a warmth that bordered on reverence. Serafina offered him a gentle smile in return, one that felt far too genuine for Alistair's liking. Alistair's jaw tensed. He had expected Benedict to greet her cordially. He had not expected the familiarity of a man who had already enjoyed several pleasant conversations with her. Their interactions spoke of mutual comfort, perhaps even admiration. He moved closer, not enough to be obvious, but enough to hear fragments of their conversation. "Your performance at Lady Merriweather's musicale was remarkable," Benedict was saying, his tone earnest. "Hardly remarkable," Serafina replied, though her smile betrayed modest pride. "But I am grateful for your kindness." "Kindness has nothing to do with it," Benedict said gently. "Your voice held something honest, rare even." Serafina glanced down briefly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "You are too generous." "And you," Benedict replied, "are too humble." Alistair's chest tightened, the old wound within him throbbing as jealousy, sharp and unfamiliar, spread through him with slow precision. He had never been a man prone to jealousy. His pride usually prevented it, yet now it clawed at him, fueled by the knowledge that Benedict possessed qualities he had never bothered to offer his wife. Softness, warmth, admiration, qualities Serafina clearly responded to. He forced himself to look away before someone noticed the tension in his expression. But his resolve faltered when the orchestra shifted into a gentle waltz, and Benedict offered his hand to Serafina. "Would you honor me with this dance?" Benedict asked. Serafina hesitated, not out of reluctance but out of propriety. Her gaze flickered toward Alistair, unintentionally, perhaps reflexively, and for a brief moment their eyes met across the room. The meaning of the moment was complex, not an invitation, not a plea, merely acknowledgement, recognition. Alistair felt the impact deep within his chest. Then, with graceful composure, Serafina placed her hand in Benedict's. The two stepped onto the dance floor. As the waltz began, their movements were elegant, effortless, each turn executed with fluid harmony. Benedict's hand rested lightly at her waist, guiding her with the precision of a practiced partner. Serafina followed with a natural grace that made them appear almost ethereal beneath the chandelier light. Alistair watched in agonized silence. He recognized the expression on her face, not joy exactly, but peace, a sense of ease he had never afforded her, a quiet comfort she had found elsewhere, away from him. Genevieve appeared beside him, her voice low. "She dances beautifully tonight," he exhaled slowly. "Indeed. She seems free," Genevieve murmured. "Do you see it?" "Yes." He forced the word through clenched teeth. "And Benedict?" she asked cautiously. "A man of fine reputation," Alistair admitted, though the words tasted sour. "Accomplished, charismatic. He is everything you are not giving her, Genevieve whispered gently. Alistair's pulse stilled. Genevieve rested a hand on his arm. You cannot expect her to remain suspended in the memory of your rejection. She is trying to live, Alistair, and others are willing to help her do so. His gaze locked on Serafina as Benedict spun her gracefully beneath the chandelier. Her lips curved into a soft smile, nothing extravagant, nothing inappropriate, just warm. Warmth she had never shown him. He felt the first sting of true jealousy then, not just for Benedict's presence, but for the possibility that Serafina might be happier in another man's company. That was a thought he could not endure. The dance ended to gentle applause. Benedict bowed with polished charm, and Serafina curtsied. They exchanged a few more words before stepping aside. Alistair braced himself as Benedict escorted her toward the refreshment table, toward him. Benedict greeted Alistair with a courteous bow. Your Grace. Lord Benedict, Alistair replied, his tone cool but not impolite. I was just complimenting the Duchess on her musical talent, Benedict said with an easy smile. You must be very proud. Alistair's throat constricted slightly. Indeed. Serafina inclined her head politely. Your Grace. He nodded, forcing the formality. My lady. For a moment, the three of them stood together, the air thick with unspoken tension. Benedict appeared oblivious, or perhaps simply unaffected, by the undercurrents between the married couple. He continued speaking with his characteristic warmth, though Alistair hardly heard the words. What he noticed was the way Serafina's posture relaxed when Benedict addressed her, how her eyes softened, how her voice gentled. He felt like an outsider in his own life. At last, Benedict excused himself to greet another acquaintance, leaving Alistair and Serafina alone. She turned slightly away, preparing to follow the flow of guests back toward the ballroom floor. He took a step forward, blocking her gently. Serafina, he said quietly. She paused. Yes, Your Grace. His heart pounded, harder than he liked. You dance well. Thank you, she replied, her tone neutral. With Benedict, he added before he could stop himself. A faint shift in her expression, barely perceptible, told him she understood the implication. He is a skilled dancer. That was evident, he murmured. Is there something you wish to say? She asked, her voice calm, yet cool. He hesitated. I did not expect to see you dance with him. And why not? She asked softly. I'm not bound to stand alone in a ballroom, Your Grace. He looked away. He is known for his charm. Serafina's voice held no sharpness, only quiet clarity. Charm is not a sin. No, he replied tightly. It is not. She studied him for a moment, her face unreadable. If you fear impropriety, I assure you there is none. I did not suggest impropriety. You implied concern, she said gently, or jealousy. He stiffened. I do not experience jealousy lightly. Serafina lowered her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. No, you experience mistrust instead. The words struck him with quiet precision. She took a breath, then stepped aside. If you will excuse me, Your Grace. He did not follow. He could not, for as she walked away, her gown whispering softly along the ballroom floor, he realized with sudden unwelcome clarity that jealousy was no longer a distant emotion he could dismiss. It was here, cold and sharp, and rooted in something he had tried to deny. He wanted her attention, not out of pride, not out of ownership, but out of something far more dangerous, something he had no idea how to earn. He remained standing there long after she disappeared into the crowd, the echo of their conversation reverberating through him. Jealousy was not his nature. Yet here he stood, undone by a woman who had every right to turn her back on him. The torment settled deep within him, unyielding and unresolved. And as the night wore on, he understood one truth with alarming clarity. He was losing her, not because she sought another man, but because she had learned how to live without him. And that, above all, was the fear he could not escape. The night of the Harrington Ball stayed with Alistair long after the final notes of the orchestra faded. It settled into him like a fever, not loud enough to force action, but persistent enough to haunt him. Every moment replayed itself in exhausting clarity. Serafina's quiet smile, Benedict's poised charm, their effortless waltz, the way her eyes had glanced toward Alistair with polite detachment before drifting away. For days afterward, he moved through Ravenswood Manor with unusual restlessness. His staff, trained to read silence rather than words, exchanged glances but did not interfere. Genevieve, however, was not deterred by his cold composure. "You cannot ignore this, Alistair," she said one morning over tea, her tone firm but sympathetic. "Your distance is no longer invisible. People see it. She sees it." He set his cup down with deliberate precision. "I am not ignoring anything." "You are avoiding everything," she corrected, "especially her." He did not reply. Genevieve sighed, long and weary. "You banished her once. Whether you admit it or not, you are on the verge of doing it again." The words settled heavily between them. That afternoon, unable to concentrate on estate matters, he left the manor under the pretense of visiting the London branch of his solicitor's office. In truth, he simply needed distance, though he did not. Know from what? Her presence or his own failing composure? Winter London greeted him with its familiar blend of fog and coal smoke. The streets were damp from a recent rain, reflecting the grey sky in uneven pools. His carriage rolled through Mayfair, passing elegant townhouses and bustling inns, until it slowed near the entrance of one of London's most esteemed botanical gardens, a place known for winter conservatories of exotic plants. He had not intended to stop, but when he saw the modest crowd gathered inside, a soft melody from a string quartet drifting through the air and, most importantly, the unmistakable silhouette of Serafina among the visitors, he felt a surge of emotion so sudden it nearly stole his breath. She stood beneath a glass dome, surrounded by winter lilies and soft ferns, speaking quietly with Benedict. Of course Benedict was there. Of course he was. Alistair felt his jaw tighten. Serafina held a small booklet of botanical sketches, which Benedict was explaining with the enthusiasm of a scholar. She listened attentively, her expression warm with genuine interest. Alistair remained partly concealed behind a marble column, observing them with uncharacteristic intensity. He was not spying, he told himself. He was merely ensuring propriety. But the truth settled uncomfortably inside him. He did not trust himself near her, not when jealousy pulsed beneath every breath he took. The conversation drifted toward him. "And this species," Benedict said, pointing to a delicate blossom, "was discovered near Verona. They say lovers once exchanged them as secret tokens." Serafina smiled faintly. "It is charming, though I doubt the truth of such legends." "Some legends begin as truths," Benedict murmured. Alistair felt something twist sharply inside him. He stepped out from behind the column. "Lord Benedict," he said, his tone cooler than winter air. Benedict turned, genuinely pleased. "Your Grace, I did not expect to see you here." Alistair inclined his head stiffly. "Nor I you." Serafina's expression remained perfectly composed. "Good afternoon, Your Grace." "Lady Serafina," he replied, though the formality felt increasingly unbearable. "We were just admiring the winter lilies," Benedict explained. "The conservatory is magnificent this time of year." "So I see," Alistair said, though his gaze remained fixed on Serafina. "I did not know you frequented such places." "I enjoy quiet gardens," she replied gently. "They give my mind room to breathe." "And does your mind need room today?" he asked, unable to mask the edge in his voice. Serafina blinked, a faint crease of discomfort appearing between her brows. "Everyone needs moments of calm, Your Grace." Benedict sensed the tension and subtly stepped aside. "I shall give you both a moment." Alistair watched him go with restrained hostility before returning his attention to Serafina. She stood poised, her hands clasped lightly, her posture dignified despite the tension between them. "You came to London without informing me," he said quietly. She met his gaze without flinching. "I was invited by Lady Harrington. It seemed discourteous to refuse." "You could have sent word." "I did not think my whereabouts mattered to you." The bowl of his chest hollowed at her calm assertion. "That is not true," he said, the words slipping out more quickly than he intended. She studied him. "You have never indicated otherwise." He took a step closer, voice low. "I do not appreciate seeing you accompanied everywhere by Benedict Ashcombe." Her brows rose almost imperceptibly. "He has shown me nothing but kindness." Kinder than your own husband? The bitterness in his tone startled even him. Serafina inhaled softly. Kindness is not a contest, Your Grace. But yes, Lord Benedict has been gracious. And you enjoy his attentions, Alistair said, regretting the accusation even as it left his lips. Her lips parted in surprise, then closed again, tightening with quiet. Hurt. It is not attentions I seek, she said slowly. It is respect, something I have received more from him in 2 days than I did from you in our entire marriage. The blow landed with ruthless accuracy. Alistair stiffened, breath sharpening. That is an unfair comparison. Is it? She asked softly. I was cast out by you on our wedding night, and since my return, you have spoken to me only in fragments. Criticism, restraint, suspicion. Her voice wavered slightly. Do you know what I asked? Of Lord Benedict? Nothing. And he still offered me warmth. Alistair's temper was a rare force, one he kept buried out of principle. But now, jealousy and shame tangled inside him, fracturing the composure he valued above all. Warmth is easily given when emotion costs nothing, he said tightly. Her eyes widened, hurt deepening. Emotion costs nothing? Is that what you believe? I believe, he said, that you are not cautious enough with those who offer comfort too eagerly. Serafina's expression hardened, not with anger but with decisive clarity. No, Your Grace, I am simply no longer willing to fear a man's temper. His breath froze. I do not frighten you, he said quietly. She held his gaze. You once did. The conservatory air thickened with unspoken pain. He stepped even closer. I am not my father. Serafina's breath caught. I never said you were. But you wield silence and authority, as he once did. He felt the accusation pierce him like a blade. Serafina. She shook her head gently. I am tired of defending myself from your assumptions, tired of being the object of your mistrust. He felt something inside him crack. You speak as if I wished to mistrust you, he said, voice strained. You do, she whispered, because trusting me would require you to face the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. He staggered internally at her insight. No one had ever seen him so clearly. He did not know how to respond. She turned away. I should go. He reached out instinctively to stop her, but caught himself just inches from touching her sleeve. She noticed, and her voice dropped to a quiet, mournful softness. You once sent me away without hesitation. I will not wait for you to do it again. He swallowed hard. Serafina, she stepped back, shaking her head. Good day, Your Grace. She left him standing among winter lilies and glass walls that reflected his expression back at him, hollow, rigid, quietly unraveling. Something inside him began to crumble. He returned to Ravenswood Manor that evening in a silence so suffocating that even the horses seemed uneasy. The fog had thickened, draping the countryside in a grey heaviness that mirrored his thoughts. Inside the carriage, he forced himself to remain composed, but the weight in his chest pressed harder with each mile. When he arrived, Genevieve was waiting in the foyer. One look at him, and her expression shifted. What happened? He brushed past her. Nothing that concerns you. Alistair, her voice rose, uncharacteristically stern. Do not walk away from this. He stopped, shoulders rigid. She left the conservatory, he said. And Benedict was with her, he added sharply, immediately regretting how juvenile it sounded. Genevieve exhaled slowly. You cannot keep blaming others for the consequences of your own actions. The words hit him harder than intended. Leave me, he said quietly. But Genevieve did not. She is not the girl you married. She is a woman. Now, a woman who has learned to protect herself. You cannot expect her to endure your pride simply because you bear the title of Duke. He closed his eyes, tension rippling across his shoulders. She said I frightened her, he whispered, the admission barely audible. Genevieve softened. She said you frightened her once because you had the power to cast her aside. She believes I will do it again. Genevieve stepped closer. Will you? His breath shook. No. Then prove it, she said gently. Prove that she is safe with you. He had no answer. For the next 2 days, Serafina remained in London, and Alistair remained at Ravenswood, trapped in thoughts he could not silence. He replayed every conversation, every pause, every flicker of emotion in her gaze. Her words echoed relentlessly. "Trusting me would require you to face the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. I will not wait for you to do it again. I once feared you." He had never meant to frighten her, but intention was irrelevant when the result was pain. He finally resolved to go to London, to speak to her, to attempt something. He did not even know what he hoped to say, but the decision brought a strange sense of clarity. Before he could leave, however, a letter arrived. Not from her, from Lady Harrington. A simple message. Lady Seraphina has departed London to stay with acquaintances at Highwood Estate. She asked for no messages to be sent to Ravenswood. A cold tightness gripped his chest. She had gone, by choice, away from him, escaping him. And for the first time, Alistair understood the magnitude of his mistake. Not the banishment months ago, but the pride he had carried ever since. Pride that had pushed her away even as he longed for something he could not admit. He felt fear echo through him. Quiet, devastating, unmistakably real. Fear of losing a woman he had never allowed himself to love. Fear that it was already too late. He stood alone in his study, the rain striking the windows, like restless fingers, and felt the weight of regret settle fully onto him. The break had come, and he had been the one to cause it. The days that followed Seraphina's departure unfolded with a heaviness Alistair could neither dispel nor ignore. Ravenswood Manor, once nothing more than a fortress of duty and responsibility, now felt unbearably vast. Every echo in its corridors seemed louder, every shadow longer. Even the servants walked with softer steps, as though the manor itself sensed its master was unsettled. Alistair spent the first morning after receiving Lady Harrington's note in his study, the rain tapping insistently against the tall windows. He had not slept. His cravat hung slightly askew, his hair uncharacteristically disheveled. Papers lay untouched on his desk, estate accounts, correspondence, political invitations, but he stared through them as if they were written in a language he could no longer read. Across from him, in a delicate silver frame, sat the sole portrait, ever painted of Seraphina before their wedding. She had been barely 19, her expression gentle, eyes downturned in modesty. He had rarely looked at the portrait after their marriage. It had been easier to avoid confronting the woman he believed he had misjudged. Now he found himself unable to turn away from it. The soft knock at the study door broke the silence. "Enter," he said quietly. Genevieve stepped inside, her expression cautious. She had not seen him since the previous evening, and seemed startled by the fatigue clinging to him. "You look unwell," she said honestly. "I am fine," he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Alistair," she said gently, closing the door behind her, "you need not pretend." He looked out the window, watching the rain streak the glass like thin silver threads. "She left London." "I know," Genevieve said softly. "Lady Harrington wrote to me as well." Something inside him twisted. "She asked that no messages be sent to Ravenswood." Genevieve approached the desk slowly, placing a hand over his. "She is protecting herself." He did not reply. The silence stretched between them, heavy as fog. "You drove her to this," she said quietly, though not unkindly. "Not with intention, but with fear. Yours." His breath tightened. "I do not fear her. You fear needing her." The words cut deeper than he expected. He tried to speak, but Genevieve continued, her voice softening. "You fear what she awakens in you. Things you have spent your entire life suppressing." He stared at the rain. "Perhaps." "No," she corrected gently. "Certainly." He closed his eyes briefly. When he spoke again, his voice was low. "I banished her once, and she returned more gracious than I deserved. And I—" His words faltered, fragile. "I pushed her away again." Genevieve squeezed his hand. "You are not irredeemable, Alistair." "No," he replied quietly, "but I may already be too late." Genevieve hesitated, then stepped back. "Only if you choose to be." She left, him alone with his regret. By late afternoon, he could no longer bear the confines of the study. He left the manor on horseback, despite the rain. The cold droplets stung his face as he rode through the misty countryside, his cloak whipping behind him. His thoughts churned with memories he had tried to bury for years. His mother's soft voice, his father's stern commands, the isolation of childhood lessons in discipline and restraint. He remembered, too vividly, the night he had cast Serafina out. He had stood in the corridor, fists clenched, heart hammering with a panic he mistook for suspicion. The maid's whisper, the rumors of impropriety, the sight of Serafina standing alone in the dim entry hall, all of it had collided with the old wounds he had never healed. He had chosen rejection instead of inquiry, pride instead of truth. Now he saw the mistake, clearly, painfully. When he finally returned to Ravenswood, soaked and exhausted, he found himself drawn not to the study, but to the small guest chamber at the far end of the east wing, Serafina's room for the brief night she spent in the manor. He pushed the door open slowly. The room was modest compared to the grand duplex meant for the Duchess, but still elegant. A faint trace of lavender lingered in the air, Serafina's preferred scent. Her travel trunk, hastily packed months ago, had never been unpacked. The bedspread was smooth, untouched since the morning she left. A single candle sat on the bedside table, half melted. He crossed the room with quiet steps, feeling like an intruder in his own home. Atop the vanity lay something he had never seen before, a small notebook, bound in soft blue leather. He hesitated before reaching for it, fingertips brushing the cover as if it were a fragile relic. He opened it. The first pages were blank. Then, in delicate handwriting, he found a short entry, one that made his breath catch. I do not know him. He does not wish to know me. I have become a stranger in the one place I hope to call home. He closed the book abruptly, his pulse hammering in his throat. He had not known. He had never bothered to know. Guilt washed over him, quiet, cold, relentless. He returned the notebook to the exact position he found it, then stood there for a long time, unable to move. That night he attempted to write to her. He sat in the study with a sheet of fine parchment before him, the candle's flame trembling in the draught. His quill hovered over the page, but the words refused to come. He finally wrote, "My dear Serafina." The phrase startled him. Too familiar, too intimate for a man who had kept every emotion behind locked doors. He crossed it out. He tried again. "Lady Serafina, I have reflected upon our last conversation." He paused, jaw tightening. The sentence was lifeless, hollow. Another attempt began and ended in frustration. The third, fourth, fifth drafts were no better. At last, he tore the letters into thin strips, feeding them into the fire one by one. The flames devoured each failed apology, casting brief bursts of light across the study walls. He leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed to the bridge of his nose, a rare crack in his stoic composure. He wanted to say something real, something honest, but honesty required vulnerability, and vulnerability was a skill he had never learned. The thought occurred to him unbidden. Perhaps Serafina was right. He did not know the truth of himself, and until he did, he could not hope to reach her. The days turned into a week of silence, a week of distance, a week of torment. Serafina's absence sharpened everything. The manor felt colder, meals quieter, the evenings unbearably long. Even the estate matters seemed hollow without the possibility, however faint, of crossing paths with her in the halls or sharing an accidental glance across a drawing room. He found himself lingering at windows, watching the road for any sign of a carriage. None came. Genevieve worried. "Alistair," she said one morning, "you must go to her." "And say what?" he asked bitterly. Genevieve's voice softened. "The truth." He looked away. "I do not know the truth." She stepped closer. "Then discover it, for her sake, and for yours." 2 nights later, London called him back, not for Serafina but for political duty. Parliament was assembling for an early winter session, and his presence was obligatory. He travelled by carriage through thick evening fog, the clattering wheels echoing through the narrow streets as gas lamps flickered dimly through the mist. But he was not thinking of politics. He thought of Serafina at Highwood Estate, an elegant countryside manor near the Dorset border, known for its tranquil lakes and sprawling rose gardens. He imagined her walking along the frozen grounds, the winter light catching in her hair. He imagined her reading quietly by the hearth, her fingers tracing the edges of a book. He imagined her smiling, softly, serenely, with no thought of him. Image tormented him. He arrived at the parliamentary building with a heaviness he could not hide. Several colleagues greeted him, but he responded with absent-minded courtesy. One of them, Lord Pembroke, glanced at him curiously. "You seem troubled, Ravenswood." "I am merely tired," Alistair replied, though the lie was thin. Pembroke considered him. "Your wife is much admired in society these days. I suppose you've seen the notices." Alistair's chest tightened. "Notices?" Pembroke smiled. "Indeed. Letters in the society papers praising Her Grace at recent events. Even a poem, published anonymously, of course, about the Duchess whose smile restored winter's warmth. London is quite taken with her." Alistair's grip on his cane tightened. He forced his voice to remain neutral. "I see." Pembroke continued lightly, unaware of the effect his words had. "And Lord Benedict Ashcombe seems particularly attentive, though discreet naturally. The man is nothing if not polished." Alistair inhaled sharply. Pembroke clapped him on the shoulder. "You are fortunate, Ravenswood. A duchess adored by all of London. What more could a man ask for?" He gave a polite smile he did not feel. "Indeed." But as Pembroke walked away, Alistair felt something inside him shift, slowly, irrevocably. He was beginning to understand fear, not fear of impropriety, not fear of scandal, not fear of losing control, but fear of losing her, truly losing her, to time, to distance, to another man, or, worst of all, to a life where she thrived without him. Later that night, back in his London townhouse, he made a decision. No, not a decision. A vow. He stood at the window overlooking Grosvenor Square, the lamps casting faint yellow trails through the fog. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, stern, tired, haunted, a man carved from pride, and now fractured by regret. He spoke aloud, to no one but the empty room. "I will not lose her." His voice trembled, just once, before settling into quiet. Determination. "I will go to her. I will speak to her. I will try." The last word felt foreign, humbling, necessary. He turned from the window, the weight on his shoulders shifting from paralysis to purpose. Tomorrow, he would ride to Highwood Estate, not as a duke, not as a man defending his pride, but as a man seeking redemption. Before retiring for the night, he opened a fresh sheet of parchment. His hand still trembled slightly, but he forced himself to write, not for her, but for himself. "Serafina, I am coming. If you will allow me, I wish to speak plainly. I owe you the truth, I owe myself the truth, and I owe us the chance I denied you the night you became my wife." He stopped. It was not perfect. It was not polished, but it was honest. The closest to honesty he had allowed himself in years. He folded the letter carefully, placed it into an envelope, and sealed it. But he did not send it. He slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. He would give it to her in person, or not at all. Either way, tomorrow would begin a journey he had avoided for too long. As he extinguished the candle, the room fell into darkness, and for the first time, darkness felt like a beginning, not an end. The following morning dawned grey and heavy, the London fog clinging to the city like a shroud. Alistair rose before the servants, something he had not done since his military days, and dressed with unusual purpose. His valet watched him with startled discretion. Never had his grace prepared for travel without giving orders the night before. Yet Alistair refused the valet's help, fastening his cravat and buttoning his coat himself, as though the ritual carried some symbolic weight. He left London before sunrise, taking only one attendant and riding at a pace that rivaled urgency. The cold air bit at his face, and the frost-covered landscape blurred past him as he pushed the horses harder than he should have. But restraint was impossible now. Every hour apart from Serafina felt like an admission of cowardice. Highwood Estate lay several miles northwest, nestled near a forested ridge overlooking a cluster of frozen lakes. The estate belonged to the Pembroke family, old friends of Serafina's mother. It was serene, refined, and far enough from London to offer the quiet anyone might need, especially someone fleeing emotional turmoil. By midday, the estate appeared through a veil of fog, its pale stone walls giving it an almost ethereal presence. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and the distant sound of a carriage echoed faintly through the hills. Alistair slowed his horse as he approached the long gravel drive. His chest tightened with something that felt uncomfortably like apprehension. He was here, at last. He dismounted before the steps, handing the reins to a groom. The great wooden doors opened before he could knock, revealing Mrs. Brentwood, the estate's long-serving housekeeper. Her warm expression shifted immediately upon seeing him. "Your Grace," she said with a stiff curtsy. "We were not expecting—" "No," he said, voice low. "I did not send word. Lady Seraphina is currently out walking the grounds," the housekeeper said cautiously. "She did not mention expecting company." "I do not doubt it," he murmured. Mrs. Brentwood hesitated, as though weighing whether to protect her guest or obey the authority of a duke. At last, she stepped aside. "You will find the lake path just beyond the south gardens," she said quietly. "She walks there in the mornings." Alistair nodded, touched his gloved hand to his chest in brief gratitude, and stepped inside only long enough to warm himself. Within minutes, he was walking toward the frozen lake, the sharp winter air biting into his lungs, each breath a reminder of why he had come. Because he could no longer remain silent, because pride had cost him enough, because running from his feelings had brought him only emptiness, and because Seraphina deserved more than the shadow of a husband. He had been. The estate's south gardens were quiet, their fountains frozen into elegant statues of ice. The path curved gently toward the lake, the crunch of gravel under his boots breaking the stillness of the winter morning. He slowed as he approached the clearing. There she was. Seraphina stood alone at the edge of the frozen water, her cloak wrapped tightly around her, the hood falling back slightly to reveal her dark hair pinned neatly beneath it. Her breath formed delicate clouds in the air, and she watched the lake with a contemplative stillness that made him ache. For a moment he said nothing. He simply watched her, watched the woman who had become his torment, his regret, his hope, without ever seeking to be any of those things. Then, as though feeling the weight of his gaze, she turned. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Your Grace." His breath faltered. He stepped forward. "Seraphina." The wind shifted, lifting the edge of her cloak. She held herself in a posture both dignified and guarded. "What are you doing here?" she asked softly. "I came to speak with you." Her expression stiffened. "I did not invite you." "No," he agreed. "You did not." She hesitated. "Then why?" "Because I have spent weeks saying nothing, and silence has accomplished nothing." His voice remained low, controlled, but the tension beneath it was unmistakable. Seraphina drew a slow breath, visibly steadying herself. "Your Grace, this is not necessary. I left London for peace." "Peace?" he repeated. "Is that what I gave you?" She closed her eyes briefly, as though the question itself caused her pain. "You gave me confusion, hurt, disappointment." Her words struck him harder than he expected. "I know. And yet you arrive here unannounced," she continued. "Expecting what? Gratitude? Conversation? Forgiveness?" "No," he said quietly. "I expect nothing." That truth surprised her. He stepped closer. "But I cannot continue living at Ravenswood, pretending the world has not shifted." "That I have not shifted." Her gaze sharpened. "You speak of shifting, Your Grace, but words are easy. Actions are not." "I know," he said. "And yet," she added, lifting her chin, "you have spent months offering me nothing but suspicion and distance." "I came to change that," he said. "How?" she asked. "With apologies you do not know how to speak, with promises you may not keep." His jaw tightened. "I brought no promises." She waited. "But I brought truth." Seraphina's breath hitched faintly. "Then, speak it." He felt the wind cut through his coat, but the cold was nothing compared to the fear coiling inside him. "I have been afraid," he said slowly. "Not of you, of myself." Her eyes softened with a mix of disbelief and something else, something dangerously close to empathy. But she did not speak. He continued. "My father taught me that vulnerability was weakness, that trust invited ruin, that affection made a man foolish." Seraphina swallowed, her posture shifting slightly. I believed. Him, Alistair whispered. For years I believed him. Even when he died, I carried his lessons like chains. He paused. But you, his voice cracked, barely audible. You did not fit into those lessons. Seraphina's eyes shone with something unreadable. I misjudged you, he said, cruelly, and I despise myself for it. A fragile silence hung between them. Finally, she spoke. Your Grace, I appreciate your honesty, truly, but I cannot simply reopen the door you closed. I know, and I cannot. Trust you, she added, voice trembling slightly. Not yet. Pain flickered across his features, though he masked it quickly. Then let me earn it. How? She whispered. With time, he said. With action. With change. She looked away. And what if I am tired of waiting for what might never come? Then tell me what you need, he said gently. And if it is within my power, I will do it. She laughed softly. Not with amusement, but with disbelief. Do you even hear yourself? He stepped closer, slowly. Every word. Seraphina's breath shook. Your Grace, you cannot appear at Highwood and expect my heart to simply soften. No, he said. I expect nothing, but I will try. The vulnerability in his voice unsettled her. She wrapped her cloak tighter around herself, as though shielding her emotions from the winter air. I am not ready, she whispered. He nodded, though the motion cost him. Then I will wait. For how long? She asked, turning toward him. As long as it takes. Her lips parted with surprise. She looked away again, eyes tracing the frozen surface of the lake. You cannot follow me everywhere, she murmured. I have no intention of doing so, he said. But I will not remain at Ravenswood, pretending indifference. She hesitated. Your Grace, I did not leave to hurt you. I know, he said. But you left because of me. Seraphina inhaled deeply. Perhaps. But I also left because I needed clarity. And have you found it? He asked. She did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was soft. Some parts of myself, yes, others, not yet. He nodded, though fear tugged at him. And what of us? She closed her eyes. I do not know. For the first time, he felt real desperation rise in him. Not anger, not pride, but the aching fear that comes when something precious is slipping beyond reach. He stepped closer. Seraphina, if I ask for one chance, just one, would you grant it? She looked up, startled by the rawness of his voice, but her answer was hesitant. I cannot say. Will you meet with me again? He pressed quietly. Not as husband and wife, but simply as two people trying to understand what is left. Her breath trembled. I do not know. Will you consider it? He asked. Another silence. Then she nodded. I will consider it. Relief washed through him. Not victory, not joy, but the fragile relief of a man who had been drowning and finally breached the surface. He exhaled slowly. Thank you. Seraphina looked away again, struggling with emotions she refused to show. I must return inside, she murmured. It is cold. Allow me to walk you. No, she said gently, cutting him off. Not today. He froze. She stepped back from him, her expression soft but firm. I am considering your request. Nothing more. He bowed his head. Then I will not press further. She turned and walked toward the estate, her cloak brushing the snow-dusted path. He watched her until she disappeared into the gardens, the cold wind whispering around him. When she was gone, he reached into his coat, touching the sealed letter he had written. He pulled it out slowly, staring at the envelope that contained the words he had never spoken aloud. Then he tore it in half, then again, and again. The pieces fluttered in the wind like pale winter leaves. She was right. Words were easy. Action was not. He would not give her letters. He would give her change. As he turned to leave the lake, the sky darkened suddenly with a gathering storm. Snow began to fall, thick, heavy flakes that blurred the landscape. He quickened his pace, knowing the storm could turn dangerous, but as he approached the estate's outer path, a sound froze him mid-step. A scream. Seraphina's voice. High, sharp, terrified. Seraphina! He ran. The world narrowed to the sound of her cry, the echo of cracking ice, and the surge of fear swallowing him whole. What he found waiting would change everything. The scream tore through the frozen air with a force that snapped every instinct inside Alistair. For a split second he could not breathe. Then instinct overtook thought and he ran, faster than he had ever moved in his life, boots slipping on patches of ice as he cut across the garden path toward the lake. "Serafina!" His voice rang across the clearing, harsh and raw. The frozen lake shimmered in shades of silver and white, but something was wrong. Too still, too quiet. Only the echo of the scream remained, fading into the cold like a plea swallowed by winter. He reached the lake's edge and saw the break in the ice, a dark, jagged line near the reeds where the surface had thinned. Fear ripped through him. "Serafina!" Then he saw her, clinging to the edge of the cracked ice, her cloak soaked, her fingers gripping the jagged surface with desperate strength. The cold had already begun tightening her movements, her breath shallow and rapid. Alistair's heart seized. "Hold on!" he shouted, kneeling near the edge. "Serafina, look at me!" She lifted her head, weakly. Her lips were pale and her eyes wide with shock and terror. "Your Grace," she gasped, voice trembling. "The ice, it just—" "I know," he cut in, already shrugging off his coat. "Keep your hands above the surface. Do not let go." She tried, but her strength faltered. "Alistair," her voice cracked. I can't." "You can," he said sharply, crawling forward on his stomach to distribute his weight. Every second felt agonizing. "You must." The ice creaked beneath him, a warning, and he froze, calculating the distance, the risk. One wrong move and they would both be consumed by the freezing water. He stretched out his hand. "Serafina, take my hand." She hesitated, not out of mistrust, but fear. Her limbs were numb, fingers trembling violently. "Serafina." His voice lowered into something fierce, something stripped of every mask he'd ever worn. "I am here. I will not let you fall. Take my hand." Her eyes filled with tears, fear, exhaustion, and something else entirely. She reached for him. Their fingers touched. He grasped her wrist firmly, anchoring her with a strength she no longer had. She let out a choked sob, half relief, half pain. "Hold tight," he murmured. "I have you." The ice moaned under his weight, cracking slightly. Alistair clenched his jaw. He pulled, slowly, carefully, bracing his feet against the frozen ground. Serafina's cloak dragged heavily, the water weighing it down like a stone. Her breathing turned ragged. "It's too heavy." "Then leave it," he said, voice cracked with urgency. "You, not the cloak." With trembling fingers, she freed herself of the clasp. The moment the weight loosened, he pulled her fully onto the ice. It gave one final threatening crack, but held long enough for him to drag her onto firmer ground. The instant she was safe, she collapsed into the snow, shaking violently. He gathered her into his arms without hesitation, pulling her against him, wrapping her in his discarded coat. "Serafina," he whispered urgently, cupping her cheek. Her skin felt like ice beneath his touch. "Look at me, are you hurt?" She shook her head weakly, words lost to the cold. "Stay with me," he said, voice breaking. "Do you hear me? Stay with me." She blinked slowly, eyes glassy. "You came." "Of course I came," he said, his throat tightening to the point of pain. "God, Serafina, of course I did." He lifted her into his arms, holding her against his chest as he carried her back toward the estate. The snow fell harder now, stinging his cheeks, but he barely felt it. His only focus was the fragile woman in his arms. Her head rested against his heart, and he felt every tremor of her shivering body. A terror he had never known, not even in combat, not even in childhood, pulsed through him with each step. He could not lose her. Not like this. Not after everything. Mrs. Brentwood spotted them through the window and shouted for the servants. They rushed to open the doors, gasping as they took in the sight. "Quickly, prepare blankets." "Warm bricks, tea," Alistair commanded, his voice hoarse yet authoritative. "And send for the physician now." Serafina barely clung to consciousness as he carried her into the sitting room near the hearth. He lowered her onto a chaise, kneeling beside her as the servants draped blankets over her shivering form. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his. "You're soaked," she whispered. He pulled off his wet gloves, ignoring his numb hands. "I do not care about me." She blinked slowly. You saved me. The words cracked something inside him. Seraphina, he murmured, voice raw. I nearly lost you. Her breath trembled. I didn't mean to. Do not apologize, he said, shaking his head. Do not ever apologize for something beyond your control. She gazed at him with confusion, and something more gentle, more vulnerable than he had hoped to see again. He took her hand in both of his, warming it, cradling it, and bowed his head. Seraphina, he whispered, listen to me. She swallowed. Yes? He lifted his gaze, meeting her eyes with a nakedness he had never allowed anyone. I have been a coward. Her brows drew together in surprise. A coward, he repeated, the word tasting like truth and shame. I hid behind pride, behind silence, behind a fear I never dared name. Her breathing steadied, though her expression remained cautious. I feared needing you, he confessed, because wanting you, caring for you, meant giving you the power to hurt me. And I have lived my entire life believing that vulnerability leads only to ruin. Seraphina's lips parted, but she did not interrupt. When I banished you, it was my fear speaking. Not reason, not truth. Fear. His voice dipped. And when I saw you with Benedict, I felt jealousy. Not of him, but of the comfort he could offer without trembling inside. Her eyes softened, though she remained guarded. I came here to ask for a chance, he said quietly. But then I heard you scream, and in that moment, nothing mattered except the thought of losing you. She blinked, a tear slipping down her cheek. He caught it gently with his thumb. I cannot promise perfection, he continued, voice trembling slightly, but I promise honesty, effort, change, and, he swallowed hard, and I promise I will not run from you again. She drew a slow breath. Your Grace. Alistair, he corrected softly. If I am to speak to you with truth, then let it begin with my name. Alistair. Her lips trembled at the sound of it. Alistair, she repeated softly. He closed his eyes as if the sound of his name in her voice were too much to bear. I am not asking you to forgive me tonight, he whispered, or tomorrow, or even soon. I'm only asking you to let me try. She stared at him for a long, fragile moment, one he feared would end in quiet rejection. Finally, she spoke. You hurt me. His breath stilled. I know. Deeply, she whispered. His voice cracked. I know. Not just when you sent me away, but every time you doubted me. Every time you withheld kindness. Every time you let silence speak instead of you. He bowed his head, shame washing over him. She continued, voice trembling. I have spent months trying to convince myself that your actions did not wound me. But they did. Tears fell, quiet and controlled, down her cheeks. He met her gaze again, pain flickering openly across his features. I cannot erase what I have done, he said softly, but I can spend the rest of my life repairing what I broke. Her breath caught at the quiet intensity of his words. Seraphina, he whispered, his hand still holding hers. Tell me what is in your heart. Whatever it is, I will bear it. She looked at him with such raw honesty that he forgot to breathe. I do not know if I can trust you, she admitted. He nodded slowly. Then let me earn it. I do not know if I can love you, she added, voice trembling. His jaw tightened, but he did not look away. Then let me give you reasons. I do not know if we can undo what happened. We cannot, he said, but we can begin again. Her gaze broke then, not with rejection, but with exhaustion. And what if I am afraid, she whispered. Then I will fear with you, he said simply, but I will not leave. The room fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since their wedding night, there was no barrier between them. Only truth, fragile, painful, real. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke the words that loosened, breath from his chest. You may stay. Not forgiveness, not love, not a promise, but a beginning. Alistair bowed his head, his grip on her hand tightening with quiet reverence. Thank you, he whispered, the words carrying more emotion than he had ever allowed himself to reveal. Yet even as relief washed over him, she added something that made his heart stutter. But I am not ready to return to Ravenswood. His breath caught. I understand. And I will not promise more than I can give. Nor will I ask you to, he replied. She exhaled. We will speak again. When I am stronger. A pause. When we are both stronger. He nodded. I will wait. Just as he said it, the door opened and the physician entered, accompanied by Mrs. Brentwood. Seraphina gently withdrew her hand from his, slowly, reluctantly. Alistair rose to his feet, stepping back but never breaking eye contact with her. The physician approached. Your Grace, she must rest. The cold shock could have been far worse. Alistair nodded. I will not disturb her further. He turned toward the door, pausing only when Seraphina whispered, Alistair. He froze. She held his gaze with a small, soft expression. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic, but everything he needed. Thank you, she said simply. He bowed his head, unable to trust his voice. Then he stepped out of the room, slowly, reverently, knowing the path ahead was uncertain, fragile, and painfully slow. But for the first time, it existed, and that was enough, for now.